I'm happy to announce that EnhanceTuition now offers tutoring services directly for CIE, AS, and A2 examinations. We are also able to offer excellent tutors for physics, maths, chemistry, amongst other subjects. If you need help with your IB, A-level, AP, or university courses, please inquire at EnhanceTuition@gmail.com. In this video, we're going to work through the first paper 1 issued for the 2016 to 2018 syllabus, which is similar to the 2019 to 21 syllabus with no major changes. First, let me share some general comments from the examiner's report. A link to this report can be found in the video information box. The minimum raw mark for specific grades is listed below. 22 marks out of 30 would have been sufficient for an A grade. Now, the examiner's report highlights several questions: 3, 8, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 22, and 23. When I review those questions, I'll share the comment from the examiner's report. The first question asks us to consider the following scenario. An individual has an appointment with his bank manager. He has a choice between traveling to the appointment by car or leaving the car at home and traveling by bus and then by train. The cost of the journey are given below. Traveling by car costs $7, and then traveling by bus and train costs $5. The opportunity cost, and the correct answer is $2, A. Question 2. What confirms that scarcity exists? Scarcity exists because wants are limited and resources are finite. If a product has an opportunity cost, that means an alternative was foregone. This indicates that a choice was made, meaning a resource was limited and therefore scarcity exists. The correct answer would be A. I'll explain number 3 from the comments left by the examiner. In question 3, the largest number of candidates chose option B. This concerns a demand property of products when the production possibility relates to potential output or supply. The straight line PPC means a constant opportunity cost as given in option D. Question 4. In 2014, there was an outbreak of Ebola, a deadly disease in West Africa. People obtained information from hospitals, radio broadcasts, and notices posted by the roadside on how to prevent the disease from spreading. How can these sources of information be classified? In this case, the hospitals are rivalrous, which means one person's consumption will reduce the amount available for others. The broadcasts and notices are public goods because they are non-rivalrous and non-excludable. You cannot prevent someone who did not pay for the broadcasts or notices from receiving them, nor does one person's consumption of a notice or radio broadcast reduce that available for others. Therefore, the answer is B. Question 5. A rise in the price of a good is accompanied by an increase in the quantity demanded. What could explain this? Well, this is a question about Veblen goods. As price rises for Veblen goods, the quantity demanded increases. This is because of the goods' perception as a status symbol, and the relationship between quality and price would be positive. Question 6. What causes the demand curve for an inferior good to shift to the right? The demand for inferior goods rises with a fall in incomes. Options B and C would increase demand for normal goods, and option D is a movement along a demand curve. So our correct answer is A, a decrease in consumer incomes. Question 7. In a town, bus fares fall by 50%, and this leads to an increase in bus use by 30%. The effect on car use is very low, with only a 1% reduction. What is the value of the cross-elasticity of demand between car travel and bus travel? We ignore the increase in bus use by 30% and divide the percentage change in quantity demanded for car travel, negative 1%, by the fall in bus fares of 50%. Since both are negative, our result is a positive 0.02. In the diagram, the rectangular hyperbola DD represents a firm's demand curve. The significant point in question 8 is that the demand curve is a rectangular hyperbola. This means that revenue is constant at all prices. This is indicated in option C. 1/3 of the candidates who selected B missed that the curve is exceptional and has a constant price elasticity of 1. Question 9. What is the price elasticity of supply? The correct answer here is D, the comparison of the proportionate change in supply to the proportionate change in price. This is a common mistake made by students. They think that PES measures the change in quantity supplied with respect to a change in price. The important part of the definition is the proportions by which supply and price change. Question 10. The demand for tablets increases while the cost of producing them decreases. What will be the effect on the price of tablets and on the quantity supplied? Correct answer here is C, and let me explain why. If demand increases, all else constant, equilibrium quantity and price both rise. If supply increases due to the fall in the cost of production, then quantity increases and price falls. We have two increases in quantity, but one increase in price and one fall in price. This means that there's definitely an increase in quantity, but an uncertain change in price, as we do not know if the change in demand or supply is greater. Question 11. A specific tax is placed upon each bottle of perfume sold. In the diagram, SS is the supply curve before tax, ST is the supply curve after tax. Which area represents that part of the tax revenue paid by producers? Our correct answer should be B. This is a diagram testing your knowledge of indirect taxes. The incidence of tax borne by the producer is rectangle QUTP. Option A represents total revenue, option C represents government tax revenue, and D represents the consumer incidence of tax. Question 12. In which market would equilibrium not be achieved at point E if price were above OP? The lowest facility, 23%, occurred with key C in question 12. The intent is to identify an unstable equilibrium from the four diagrams. At a price above the market equilibrium, an excess of supply over demand will cause price to return to point E. If demand is greater than supply, price will continue to rise rather than return to E, as in the correct option, C. Question 13. A company opened a garden to the public and charged for entry. The government then provided a grant to improve the garden on the condition that entry became free. What would result from the government's action? More than half of the candidates wrongly opted for D in question 13. This is incorrect, as equilibrium is still possible, although it may not be determined by price. The correct response is A, as the fall in price to zero will increase consumer surplus. Question 14. The diagram shows the percentage of those on low pay and those on extremely low pay in the UK from 1976 to 2012. A national minimum wage was introduced in 1999. Question 14 tests the ability to interpret an unfamiliar diagram. Those who opted for B made the common mistake of confusing absolute numbers with percentage values. Option C is correct, as the upward trend leading to 1999 then stabilized. A 10% tax is placed on a good. What type of product would be most likely to face the biggest impact on its equilibrium price as a result? The correct answer here is B, one with inelastic demand. Let's understand why. Question 15 was done surprisingly poorly. A simple approach, if this was not known as a fact, would have been to sketch 4 different demand curves with the same shift in the supply curve. This would give B with the greatest price change as the key. Candidates might usually expect to apply the concepts of progression and regression to taxes rather than income subsidies. 16. In 2009, the Australian government made a payment of $900 to those who earn less than $100,000 per year. How would the effect of this transfer payment be described? Progressive. In question 16, the reasoning therefore needed to be adjusted to the different case. This proved to be a challenging question even for some of the higher performing candidates who wrongly opted for D. A payment to low income earners will narrow the gap between the two income levels, so has a progressive effect. Option B. 17. The diagram shows the market for wheat. If the government wishes to fix the price at OP2, what quantity of wheat must the government buy? At price P2, quantity X is demanded. The government would want to keep the price at P2 and would need to purchase the quantity from X to Z. The mistake made by many at first glance would be to say the government needs to purchase YZ, but that would mean the price has fallen from P2 to P1. 18. As part of a privatization policy, a government deregulates bus services and sells off its public sector bus services to the private sector. What is least likely to occur following these changes? The correct answer here is D, loss-making bus services are retained. When the government privatizes public transportation, the private firms that purchase these services are likely to maximize profit and cut loss-making bus services. 19. A government decided to reduce income tax and increase sales tax. The initial equilibrium point is shown by X on the aggregate demand and aggregate supply diagram. What would be the equilibrium point after these tax changes? A reduction in income tax increases consumption and thus causes AD to shift rightwards. And in addition to this, the government increases sales tax, which results in a reduction of aggregate supply. Since the aggregate supply curve shifts leftwards, that gets us to point C. 20. The table gives data for an economy. In which year did real GDP decline compared with the previous year? The correct answer here is B, 2012. We are looking for the year in which the price index grew faster than GDP at current prices. This happens between 2011 and 2012, in which case real GDP declines. To illustrate this point, let's look at what happens in 2010 to 2011. GDP increases by 10%, and the price index reveals that prices grew by 9%. Some of the increase in GDP was attributable to inflation, but there was a small percentage that indicates output increased as well. From 2011 to 2012, GDP grew by 9.1%, yet prices grew by 14.67%. This indicates that real GDP declines. 21. What always happens when there is an increase in the consumer price index? The correct answer here is an increase in the cost of living. The consumer price index is a method of measuring inflation. If it increases, that means inflation has risen, resulting in an increase in the cost of living. 22. What would identify a country with a fundamental balance of payments disequilibrium? D, a persistent rise in foreign currency reserves. There was a very even spread of responses between the options in question 22. This can be indicative of guessing. Fundamental disequilibrium indicates a long-run problem that requires exceptional policy measures. Options A and C are not long-run, and B involves inaccurate recording of data that needs relatively normal adjustment. D is the key. Candidates should also understand that the fact that it involves a surplus does not prevent a problem existing. 23. At present, 1 unit of a country's currency exchanges for $1.20. The country aims to set its exchange rate at $1. Which combination of government actions in the foreign exchange market must achieve this aim? B, buying U.S. currency and selling its own. In question 23, the aim of government is to lower the international value of its currency. The largest group picked C. This would have the exactly opposite effect, as buying its own currency would raise its value and selling U.S. currency would lower the value of the dollar, relatively raising the domestic currency value. The key, B, would work successfully by the opposite process. 24. The diagram shows the exchange rate for the UK pound in terms of the US dollar. The original equilibrium exchange rate is at X. What will be the new exchange rate equilibrium for the UK pound following a rise in UK interest rates? The correct answer here is A. If the UK increases interest rates, that will increase the demand for the pound, shifting D to D2. Therefore, A is the new exchange rate equilibrium. If a country's terms of trade increased from a base year value of 100 to 120 in the following year, if export prices had increased by 50%, what was the change in the price of the country's imports? The correct answer here is C, positive 25%. We take a look at the weighted index of average export prices divided by the weighted index of average import prices times 100. If the index of average export prices was 150 and the index of average import prices was 125, then the terms of trade would rise from 100 to 120. To solve this, set the numerator equal to 150 and the denominator to X. Multiply that result by 100 and set it equal to 120. Dividing both sides by 100 gives you 150 divided by X equals 1.2. Multiply both sides by X and you get 150 equals 1.2X. X equals 125, which means the index of import prices grew by 25%. 26. In each country, P and Q, one person can either produce a quantity of X or the quantity of Y shown. In which case does country P have absolute advantage in the production of Y and country Q have comparative advantage in the production of X? The answer here is D. P has an absolute advantage in Y when it can simply produce more than Q. That is the case in options C and D. To calculate comparative advantage, we have to calculate opportunity cost. In option D, the opportunity cost of country Q producing product X is 8 divided by 14, or 0.57 product Y. The opportunity cost of country P producing product X is 15 divided by 16, or 0.9375 product Y. The lower opportunity cost belongs to country Q, and thus it has a comparative advantage in producing good X. Therefore, option D is correct. 27. The government removes a tariff on a product as shown in the diagram. What will be the change in domestic production? The answer here is A, a reduction of WV. And the focal point here is that the government is removing a tariff, not putting one in place. The world's supply with tariff is our starting point. At this level of world supply, domestic producers can supply OW units of the good before consumers opt to buy imports. After the tariff is removed, domestic suppliers will only supply OV goods as consumers opt for the cheaper imports. The reduction in domestic production is WV. 28. What would be increased by an expansionary fiscal policy? This would increase a budget deficit, which is the difference between tax receipts and government spending. 29. Possible policies a government might use to reduce a deficit on the current account of the balance of payments include devaluation, government spending cuts, interest rate rises, and tariffs on imports. Which two policies would be classified as expenditure switching? The correct answer here is D, tariffs on imports and devaluation. Tariffs on imports would make domestic goods more attractive to consumers in terms of price. A devaluation would make imports relatively more expensive, which would lead consumers to buy less imported goods. It would also lead foreign buyers to purchase more goods from this country, causing exports to rise. The other choices offered include one form of expenditure dampening or reducing, such as government spending cuts and interest rate rises. Therefore, D is our best choice. Question 30. In March 2014, Sweden had a change in its consumer price index of minus 0.6%. Which combination of policies might the government use to restore price stability? The correct answer here is D, to reduce interest rates and increase government expenditure. If the change in the consumer price index is negative, it indicates prices are falling. This likely means that aggregate demand is falling and that the government should pursue expansionary policies to increase economic growth. This includes option D, reducing interest rates and increasing government expenditure. In options A and B, increasing the interest rate would cause aggregate demand to fall further, and both fiscal policies in option C are contractionary. Therefore, our best choice is D.